Imagine this. It's the middle of the night and a tooth in the back of your jaw has started throbbing. Not a little twinge either. I mean that slow, deep pulse that seems to beat in time with your heart. You can practically feel your heartbeat inside your face. Now, take away the painkillers. Take away the numbing gel, the dentist you can call in the morning, and the antibiotics they might give you. Take away all of it, because the year is 40,000 BC. That tooth is not going to stop hurting. So, seriously, what do you do? Well, here's the first and not particularly comforting answer. Mostly, you endure it. For almost all of human history, when a tooth started hurting, you had to ride out the pain with your own patience. But enduring it didn't mean people simply sat there doing nothing. Ancient humans did look after their mouth, and we can actually see the evidence in their teeth. Take Neanderthals. We usually picture them as these rough, knuckle-dragging cousins of ours. But when researchers looked closely at some Neanderthal teeth, they found tiny grooves worn into the sides. These weren't marks left by chewing. They were made by something long and thin being pushed repeatedly into the same spaces between the teeth. In other words, toothpicks. And this wasn't just one unusually hygiene-conscious Neanderthal. At two different sites, El Cedron Cave in Spain and Hortus Cave in France, the majority of the individuals showed similar marks. Whole groups of Neanderthals were apparently sitting around picking things out of their teeth, probably trying to remove trapped food or relieve irritation. There's a decent chance you did the exact same thing sometime this week without realizing it's a habit that's at least 50,000 years old. Of course, a twig can only do so much. When the pain became serious, people seem to have reached for something else, something that right now is sitting in your medicine cabinet. Two things, actually: aspirin and penicillin. Now, obviously, I'm not saying Stone Age people were opening bottles of tablets, but the substances these two modern medicine eventually built on were already out there in nature. Poplar bark contains compounds called salicylic acid, which is the main compound in aspirin. Chewing the bark could have produced a mild pain-relieving effect. Then there's penicillium mold, the fuzzy blue-green stuff that grows on old bread. Some penicillium species produce substances that inhibit bacteria. That natural defense eventually led us to penicillin. So you have something that made dull pain and something with antibiotic properties, both growing in the environment long before anyone understood the chemistry behind them. And we know that at least one Neanderthal consumed both. Go back to the El Cedron Cave in Spain. One of the Neanderthals found there had a serious abscess in his jaw. His tooth was infected and he was probably in a lot of pain. Scientists scraped hardened plaque from his teeth and analyzed the DNA trapped inside it. And they found traces of poplar. They also found penicillium mold. Both were sitting inside the mouth of someone who died roughly 50,000 years ago. Now, we should be careful here. It would be very easy to turn this into a story about a Neanderthal doctor deliberately prescribing prehistoric aspirin and antibiotics. We don't know whether this person understood that the plants and mold had medicinal effects. Maybe he simply chewed bitter bark because he had noticed that it made the pain a little easier to bear. Maybe the mold was there by accident. We can't know for certain, but when you find pain-relieving plant material in the mouth of someone with a painful dental abscess, it's hard not to wonder whether he had discovered through experience that it helped. And when chewing bark wasn't enough, some ancient people went much further. They did something that sounds almost impossible for the Stone Age. They performed dentistry. The oldest example we found comes from Villabruna in northern Italy. Researchers examined a human tooth that's around 14,000 years old. The tooth had a cavity, and inside that cavity they found tiny scratch marks. Someone had taken a sharp piece of flint and scraped out the decayed material. Think about that for a second. 14,000 years ago, one person sat still while another person pushed a sharpened stone into a hole in their tooth and scraped around inside it. No anesthetic, no electric drill, no understanding of bacteria or tooth decay. Just a sharp stone, a painful tooth, and the belief that digging out the rotten part might help. And later, people became even more ambitious. Thousands of years after Villabruna, in an ancient settlement called Mehrgarh, people were drilling actual holes into teeth. They used a tiny bow drill, the same kind of tool local craftspeople use to drill holes in beads for jewelry. Apparently, at some point, somebody looked at a tool designed for bead making and thought, maybe we could use that on a tooth. And somehow, they did. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean every Stone Age village had a local dentist. These discoveries are rare. They're isolated examples scattered across thousands of years and enormous distances. But honestly, that makes them more remarkable, not less. 14,000 years ago, someone saw another person in pain, held their jaw steady, and tried to do something about it. They didn't know what a cavity was, they didn't know what bacteria were, but they understood that another human being was hurting, and they tried to help. Most of the time, though, treatment probably wasn't that sophisticated. Usually, you either pulled the tooth, waited for it to break apart, or hoped it would eventually fall out on its own. And sometimes, the tooth won, because a dental abscess isn't just painful, it's an infection. Without effective antibiotics, that infection can spread from the jaw into the neck, into the bloodstream, and eventually throughout the body, and that can kill you. We can't usually point to one ancient skeleton and say, this person definitely died from that tooth. The fatal damage often happens in soft tissue, and soft tissue usually doesn't survive for thousands of years. But the danger was absolutely real. Back then, a toothache wasn't only an inconvenience. Sometimes it was the beginning of the thing that killed you. So all of this creates a pretty grim picture. If dental treatment was that crude, pain relief was that limited, and infections were that dangerous, you'd expect ancient people to have had terrible teeth. You'd imagine everyone walking around with mouths full of cavities, constantly in pain, their teeth practically destroyed by the time they reached 25. That seems obvious, right? Except it isn't true, and this is where the story becomes much stranger. Because in many cases, the ancient people with no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no floss, and no dentist actually had healthier mouths than we do. We can tell because of the same substance your dentist scrapes off your teeth and throws away. Hardened plaque. To you and me, it's just the unpleasant stuff the hygienist chips off during a cleaning. But to a scientist, it's a time capsule. As plaque hardens, it traps tiny pieces of material inside it, food particles, proteins, microorganisms, and DNA. And once it mineralizes, that information can survive for tens of thousands of years. So researchers can take those hardened plaques from ancient skeletons and reconstruct what was living inside those people's mouths. They've done this with remains from different periods of human history. And what they found is surprising. Many hunter-gatherers, the people with no modern dental care at all, carried relatively low levels of the bacteria associated with cavities and gum disease, lower than many of the farmers who came after them, and much lower than many modern populations. In other words, some of the healthiest mouths in human history belong to people who never brushed their teeth once. How does that make any sense? It turns out cavities were never really about brushing. They were mostly about what you ate. Hunter-gatherers generally had healthier teeth than the farmers who came after them, and often healthier teeth than we do today, because their diets usually contain less of the sugar and starch that cavity-causing bacteria thrive on. But the important word there is usually. There was nothing magical about being a hunter-gatherer. If a group of foragers ate a diet rich in sweet, starchy foods, their teeth could rot just as badly as ours. And we know that because some of them did. At a site called Tafaralt in Morocco, people living around 15,000 years ago had astonishingly high levels of tooth decay. More than half of the adult teeth researchers examined were affected. That's comparable to some modern populations. And these people weren't farmers, they were hunter-gatherers. But they ate a lot of sweet and starchy wild foods, including things like acorns, pine nuts, and wild honey. That was enough to cause serious decay. When researchers compare hundreds of ancient sites, hunter-gatherers and farmers overlap much more than you might expect. So the real rule isn't hunter-gatherers had perfect teeth, and it isn't farming automatically destroyed everyone's mouth. The rule is much simpler. Sugar and starch are extremely good at feeding the bacteria that damage teeth. And there were two major moments when humans gave those bacteria exactly what they needed. The first was the spread of farming. Once people settled down, grain became a major part of everyday life. Instead of eating a varied diet of meat, plants, nuts, roots, and whatever else was available, many communities began eating the same soft, starchy foods again and again. Bread, porridge, grain, and as starch became more common, cavities became more common too. But farming wasn't the final blow. That came much later. Around the 19th century, refined flour and industrially produced sugar became cheaper and more widely available. Ordinary people could suddenly eat highly processed carbohydrates every day, often several times a day. And one bacterium, Streptococcus mutans, a destructive cavity-causing bacterium, became much more dominant in the human mouth. So think about what that means. The bacteria chewing holes in our teeth aren't simply an ancient curse that humans have always experienced at the same level. We created an environment in which they could thrive. We planted the crops. We refined the flour. We mass-produced the sugar. Then we fed those bacteria all day long. We built them the perfect home. So no, ancient humans were not all stumbling around in constant agony with mouths full of rotten teeth. Some had terrible dental problems, some suffered infections, some probably died because of them. But widespread tooth decay at the level we now consider normal is, to a large extent, a product of the way modern humans eat. In that sense, we're the ones with the rotten mouths. Tooth decay as we know it is largely a modern disease. So the next time it's 3 in the morning and one of your teeth is throbbing in time with your heartbeat and you shuffle into the bathroom looking for a small white pill, remember this. The ache is ancient, older than farming, older than cities, older perhaps than our species itself. But the scale of the rot isn't. That part we helped create in our fields, in our mills, in our factories, and in the soft, sweet food of modern life.